bofudi banhle bofudi shemi hayi nawe magolo imihlathe etimbongolo bafana bazaqile ngwafinja letalamba kudzala ha
Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, it was connected to my AirPods. I was being a bit of a material girl. Okay, I'm going to put the chat in the corner. So if anyone needs anything, please just let me know. Okay, let's get started. Thanks, everyone. Just shout if the audio goes off or anything like that. Sorry. Okay, we sorted that out. So today we're going to be looking at substance abuse. This is my cat, Minky. I had her for 13 or 14 years. And she looks like she was on coke here. So that's kind of why I included her today. Contents for what we're going to be doing. We're first going to be looking at substance use disorder and some differences between terminology when it comes to that. There's misuse of substances, there's abuse of substances, and then there's substance dependency. And then specifically, we're going to look at drug dependence and tolerance, okay? After that, we're going to then look at the causes of substance use disorders, okay? This is like reasons why substance use is prevalent in society and all of that stuff. It's not all encompassing, but it's enough for you to be examined on. And I feel like these next two lectures and then the following two on Monday and Tuesday are going to be quite interesting and open-ended ones where we can actually discuss and engage a lot more, because it's not as technical or as sciencey as the other stuff. It's rather more learning and engaging and working through information. So yeah, hopefully we all enjoy this one. I think it's quite an interesting part of biological psychology. It's something that's very close to me because I've seen how it's affected students and friends of mine while I've been at Rose University, because obviously at university age, people do become a little bit more exposed to substances and stuff like that. And we do see some abuse and misuse. And often people don't even realize that they have a problem. So yeah, let's get started. Okay, so substance use disorder. This is the definition according to the DSM-5. If you've never heard DSM before, to quote the Kardashians, that's basically Bible for psychology and psychiatry. It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is the 5th edition. Obviously, they keep revising editions. Like, for example, I think at one stage they separated ADHD into ADD and ADHD. Now you just say ADHD, and then there's the inattentive type and the impulsive type, or both, you know. I know in previous versions, there is some problematic language use, especially to do with gender dysphoria and transgender people and stuff like that. So if psychology is something you want to continue in, you'll probably become quite familiar with the DSM-5. Okay, so this is how the DSM-5 defines substance use disorder. Okay, it's when it's taken in larger amounts or over a longer period. So the substance is taken in larger amounts over a longer period. There are unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control the use. So you've tried and like you maybe acknowledge, okay, no, this is a bit too much. I'm going to try and stop, but you can't. Lots of time is spent to obtain or use or recover from the substance. You have a strong craving or desire or urge to use, like there's something in you that just can't help it and you really, really, really want it. Okay. There's a failure to fulfill obligations at work, school, or home. This is very important. I'll talk about it just now. And there's a continued use despite social or interpersonal problems. So despite this causing social problems, so say your friends are like, okay, look, like this is affecting our friendship, or it's affecting your conduct at university or whatever, or interpersonal problems now with your family or your close friends or people around you. They're starting to like get annoyed or upset with you or affected in any way by your behavior. So this is all happening, but then despite you seeing that you're hurting people, maybe there's continued use. Okay. I just wanted to go back to failure to fulfill obligations at work, school, home. We'll talk just now about like the different levels and stuff like that. But one thing that stuck out from me in my 2nd year of psychology is they spoke about like dysfunction versus a disorder. So dysfunction is like things aren't going well and it's like starting to have an impact on things. And then a disorder is once across the threshold of now like your life is being affected. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I just want to remind people, just keep yourselves muted unless you want to ask a question or whatever, so that we don't have interference. Ooh, there you go. Okay, so misuse versus abuse versus dependence. So we can supplement, or we can add the word substance in front of each of these. So we can have substance misuse, substance abuse, and substance dependence. Okay, so the first one, misuse, is use that results in adverse consequences that are not recurrent. So example, a drunk driving charge. So misuse is when you go a little bit too overboard. Sorry, it's a once-off thing. It's not all the time. It's, yeah, like a drunk driving charge, or like overdoing it at a party, drinking too much and, you know, I don't know, throwing up the next day and feeling super gross. Okay. Those once-off things, like it happens, like, let's say it happened to me last week. It's not going to happen this week again, or the next week, or the next week, or the next week. It might happen in 3 months' time again, or something like that. That's misuse. Sorry, that was brownie, not COVID. Anyway, abuse. So abuse is now a little like a step higher. Okay, so abuse is the maladaptive pattern of use that manifests recurrently and has significant consequences. So already we see consequences are going up. So an adverse consequence, like a crappy consequence, like bad thing happens, versus a significant consequence. So there's a difference there. And then also recurrent, it's not recurrent in misuse, but then in abuse, it's happening recurrently. It's happening again and again. So the example they used, constantly being late for work due to being hungover. So if that keeps happening, like if you are not rocking up to lectures every single week, like every Monday or every Thursday after Wednesday nights or whatever, you're not going to classes that day because you're hungover from the previous night, that's that you're skating on abuse now, because now it's happening often and there's significant consequences. Your education's taking a dip. Okay. Substance dependence then is a cluster of cognitive, behavioral, and physiological symptoms that indicate a person compulsively continues to use a substance. So this is so cognitive things. So some things are happening in your brain. Behavioral, your behavioral patterns, like the way you do things, is changing. And physiologically, like on your body, you can notice that this person is still using the substance. Okay. So once those changes start manifesting, okay, so once abuse has turned into something that we can physically see and take note of, and you as the person are experiencing adverse effects, like physically and cognitively and stuff, then it's dependence. Okay. Example of that would be alcoholism. Obviously, alcoholism has actual like signs and symptoms, if we want to call it that. So yeah. Okay. So can we see the difference? How misuse is that kind of the first level, where there's adverse consequences, not recurrent. Abuse happens recurrently, significant consequences. And then dependence is once it's happening so often and to such a huge degree that it's cognitively, behaviorally, and physiologically affecting you. Someone asked, what is maladaptive pattern? Okay, so mal always means bad, and adaptive is obviously like the way you do things. So a maladaptive pattern of use means it's being used in the wrong way. Okay, a maladaptive pattern of use, the substance is being used to quite a large degree and you're using it in an incorrect and too much kind of way. Okay, if a person takes it compulsively but says it does not affect, let's say, their work ethic, is it dependence? Okay, so since we're talking about it happens a lot, but they're saying it isn't affecting them, we'll say, let's say hypothetically, okay, we'll say they're on the abuse level. Unless you, as someone else from the outside, can see those cognitive, behavioral, and physiological effects, we can't jump to dependence per se in this case, but people very, very often, addicts and people with problems with abuse and misuse, will be in denial about it. Okay, so they might not realize that they're abusing a substance, but because you are constantly seeing that they're late for work or they're not showing up for lectures or whatever, it's still abuse, even if they aren't acknowledging it. Okay. So then there's this diagram. It says how substance use is happening on a continuum. So substance use, this is just having a beer, having a smoke or whatever. Substance misuse is when remember, it's not recurrent, but it happens and there's adverse effects. Substance abuse, now it's happening a lot and it's having like quite serious effects. Substance dependence, we see physiological effects, psychological effects, and what was the last one? Behavioral effects. Okay. Someone asked, if a person is addicted to a certain drug, does it fall under substance dependence or substance abuse? Addiction will fit more into dependence. We'll talk about it just now when we talk about drug dependence and tolerance. Okay, because habits can also influence your life and work ethic, etc. So yes, one of the things we'll see is how tolerance and dependence and stuff like that, eventually that person is going to feel like they need that stuff to continue. And that's going to start affecting stuff because they form that habit and now like they want to continue that habit and it becomes part of their routine. What happens if a person uses a substance occasionally, does it indicate any problem? Not necessarily, but remember we should maybe turn back to this and see how adverse are the consequences and how recurrent is it? And then we can maybe categorize to, is there a problem or not? Okay, remember, I'm not a professional in this. This is just how we would categorize each of those things. So we would look at consequences. Are there consequences happening and how recurrent it is? Recurrency isn't like a steadfast rule. So the level of recurrence for alcohol use might not be the same as the recurrence for weed use, for example, or cocaine use or something like that. So research does have to be done into this. You can't say, oh no, but they aren't smoking crack every day. That's fine. It might be that like recurrent use for crack is like, even if you smoke it once a month, that's too much. You know, they'll all be different depending on their physiological effects on the body and psychological effects. And remember, consequences also includes legalities of things. So even if you're like, no, I'm fine with this, I'm going to use the substance, even though it's illegal according to national jurisdiction or whatever, that's still an adverse consequence, okay? Because whether you like it or not, even if you don't care about the law, you're like, nah, that law is stupid, it's still not a good thing, okay? What happens if the person is still using and symptoms of dependence are not visible? Would it still be dependence? Okay, so not all of the dependence symptoms are visible, okay? Physiological might be more visible, but like often you can't tell that like inside their liver is like slowly decaying and stuff like that from use. Behavioral, since we said like they'll often be in denial about things, they might hide behavioral changes. So they might hide the fact that they're drinking so much. They might hide the fact that their work performance is dipping or their work attendance is dipping. Cognitive, that's also quite hard to judge most of the time. People will mask things. People will, they'll do anything to not acknowledge that they have a problem, because remember, the second someone has a problem, we as people that care about them are going to get worried, okay? And if you don't have a problem according to yourself, then people don't need to worry about you and there isn't a problem to fix, okay? So like we do need to be aware that when people are struggling with misuse, abuse, dependence, whatever of a substance, there is going to be lying, there is going to be denial, there is going to be masking and hiding of symptoms or consequences that they faced and stuff like that. So it's not always as easy as just ticking a few columns and figuring out where they would fit. What are examples of psychological symptoms that occur when someone reaches the stage of dependence in the example of alcohol? Okay, so remember, it would be any psychological symptom, like cognitive symptom that we see in someone that's been drinking. Okay, so slurred speech, disorganized thought, impulsivity, all of those things. Those are probably things that we'd also probably see in alcohol dependency. Okay, just less ordered thought. Alcohol is a depressant, which means that it slows down our brain's cognitive firing and stuff like that. So yeah, things are just gonna seem a little bit more slower or delayed or just not as organized or like fluid as usual in that person maybe. And remember, will be to differing extents. There's not a steadfast rule for how much it would affect this person cognitively versus that person. We'll talk about the factors that affect our vulnerability to substance abuse just now. And one of those things is genetic. So not everyone's going to be affected in the same way. Please go to the next slide with the diagram. I will now. How long does a drug take to be out of a person's body or system? I need to ask my pharmacy friend. I think he's in his room, so I can't ask him now. But I think it's called like a drug half-life, or something to do with that, but it's basically how long, like you said, it takes for a drug to stay in someone's body or system. I know for weed, it can stay in your system for up to 30 days. Okay, so yeah, and then we'll talk about like psychological holds and stuff like that if someone's having a marijuana-induced psychotic break, which is way more common than people think. And yeah, there's differing periods of time that each substance has. Okay, so that's, yeah, they all have different times. What does it mean when a person is more productive on drugs or alcohol? That's called denial. That's not true. That is not possible. Okay, we can enhance our performance by taking supplements and stuff like that, but weed does not make you more productive. I'm going to squash that myth right now. Alcohol does not make you more productive. That is called denial. That is called overcompensating, because they know, you know, there's a problem, so you're trying to mask it and work extra hard to hide it, and then, hey, look, you're more productive. No, you're not. Okay. It takes 7 working days for a drug to pack up and leave. That's not a steadfast rule. Remember what I just said? Drugs each have a different half-life, basically, of like how long it's going to leave your system. What about the case of artists? So artists, no, still not. Artists often, it's not a steadfast rule, but in recent history and in like history of arts and stuff like that, often what we've seen is that artists have undiagnosed mental disorders. In lots of the famous artists' case, because they're quite visible and we know a lot about them, so we can profile them and see there was like possibly a mental disorder. And people with mental disorders, obviously you want to fix it, you want to make yourself feel better, and often that results in self-medication, and self-medication often is often, you know, substance use as well. Because remember, all substances that we can ingest, like alcohol, weed, coke, whatever, they're all drugs. Okay. So yeah, those drugs, people use them, they want to like fix whatever's going on. Things like alcohol will release dopamine and all those things, and then you kind of feel like, oh, I feel better now, because all those chemical imbalances are fixed because of a mental disorder. But it's not a way to solve things, because it's not going to be a continuous thing. And then as soon as that drug leaves your system, you're going to feel like crap. Okay. Just continuing on the slide, substance dependence can be understood as addiction. Okay, so once you get to dependence, this is addiction. Different degrees of severity require different types of intervention. So we see if it's substance use, all we can do is prevention. So if you're just casually drinking and stuff, and someone's like a little bit concerned that it might jump to the next phase, prevention, it could just be like, hey, dude, like maybe let's try not drinking this weekend, you know, like I'll do it with you. Okay. When we get to misuse, prevention and intervention, so just brief ones, just like I just said, like, I'm a bit worried about you. Why don't we just try like dry January or whatever and stuff. And then substance abuse and dependence, they are going to need specialized substance abuse treatment. Okay, what about chronic medication? Is it not drug dependence? So yes, that's the scary thing. We can become dependent on chronic medication, okay? Specifically, chronic means we're taking it over a long period of time. So we can become dependent on that drug. That's why pharmacists and doctors have to be very careful about prescribing those things and weigh out the pros and cons. Like, yes, maybe it's good for me to be on antidepressants for 6 months, but then when I come off it, let's say things are better, I want to be off the treatment, I have to be weaned off, because there is an effect that happens. You are dependent on that drug to some extent for dopamine or serotonin release or whatever. So that's why medication, that's why it's always controlled by doctors, psychiatrists, whoever, because they know all of these things. They know how long a drug stays in your system. They know what effects the drug will have. They will know the dependence of that drug, blah, blah, blah. So in a way, it's not the drug dependence that we see here where there's these bad things happening. But like, let's say it's a dependence on antidepressants. It is going to cause cognitive, behavioral, and physiological changes, but in this case, it's a good thing because that's what the drug was trying to do. But any substance that is illicit, like drugs, like weed, alcohol, coke, MDMA, ecstasy, whatever, those, like, the bad parts outweigh the good parts. So the dependence there, when it reaches dependence, it isn't a good thing. Okay. Due to my very fun ADHD, I take Ritalin and another type of concentration medication. So I'm on 2 types and I take them every day. Does that count as an addiction? No, because addiction is an adverse thing. Remember, we're talking about adverse effects now. Misuse, abuse, dependence. These are all adverse. It's bad. It's causing problems in your life. ADHD treatment is helping you. It's helping you to concentrate. It's helping you to function better in society or whatever. The same as antidepressants, the same as anxiety meds. That's not an addiction. Okay. If you're abusing it, you're taking it and you don't need it. That's what abuse is marked by. You don't need that substance. Then it's addiction. So for example, people that take Ritalin as a party drug, that is abuse. Okay. Are people that are taking ARVs on drug dependence? No, as I just said, so please don't get this confused. We're talking about when you are taking substances in a bad way. Okay, when you're taking a drug and you don't need it. This includes weed. We don't need weed to function. Okay, please don't get this confused. You're going to see in your essay, CBD, hell yeah, good for you, all of that stuff. But as soon as we have something that affects the way our brain works in an unnecessary way, so it's not fixing a problem that is there already, like ADHD, you have a concentration problem, depression, you have a serotonin problem. That is going to be categorized in this misuse, abuse, dependence thing. Okay. What help is out there for people in South Africa, especially in low-income communities? When I come from, there is not one single place I know of to help people suffering from substance abuse who are struggling and is affecting their family and children. This is the big chat in South Africa at the moment, and especially in psychology. There's like no access to adequate healthcare, and included in healthcare is substance use prevention programs and treatments for those kinds of things, rehabs. There's such a shortage of that in South Africa. So really, it's really, really heartbreaking. There isn't enough of it. And that's why we need more psychologists and just young people interested in psychology and helping people out to go and volunteer at the few places that there are. Okay. I saw there was a raised hand, but then I think you asked in the chat. I'm going to carry on because I don't want to stay too stuck on this. Okay. So drug dependence and tolerance. Okay, so now we're going to look into the physical and psychological and the metabolic and pharmacodynamic parts of these things. Okay, so this is how you know if now there is an issue. Okay, remember all the drugs and stuff that we're talking about. When I say substance, it's things that we don't need for our body to function or to help our body to function where there's a lack. Okay, so me taking antidepressants, that is not substance abuse because I have a cognitive thing wrong with me. That serotonin is not being absorbed in my body correctly. So I need to take antidepressants. The same way as I'm not going to look at someone who has to take diabetes medication every day and say you have a substance abuse problem because you use it every day. Okay, that's no. Okay, so we're talking about substances like marijuana, alcohol, nicotine, all the party drugs, those kinds of things. That's when insulin, thank you. The word is insulin, thanks. I'm your lecturer and I can't remember insulin. Okay, but please do not go home to your friends. Do not go out to Friars tonight and say, my Psych 1 lecturer said that I should stop taking my meds. Okay, we're not talking about that, okay? We're talking about the bad stuff. Okay, so dependence, let's get back on track. It can be physical or psychological. Physical, you need to maintain a certain level of drug in the bloodstream to avoid withdrawal symptoms. So dependence, the one way we can see physical dependence on a drug is that your body now is used to the fact that there's a level of that drug in your bloodstream at all times. And the second it drops, you're going to start having withdrawal symptoms. Okay. So your body physically tells you, I need that drug right now, or else I'm going to freak out and make you miserable. Okay. Psychological, a craving for the feeling of a drug that a drug produces. Okay. So that's why a lot of people may argue, okay, you can't be physically addicted to weed. You can't be physically dependent on weed because it doesn't, like, once it leaves your bloodstream, you aren't list for it again. However, you can be psychologically dependent or psychologically addicted to the feeling that marijuana produces in your body, which is high, euphoric, or calm, whatever. So in that way, we can be something you can be addicted to, okay? Like, please, like it's out there. If you go and look it up, don't just listen to the first person who said, well, I don't crave weed. Like, my body doesn't tell me. The second you get lists for like a drug, like you're like, no, I could really, like, I want to calm down or want to feel amped up or something. The second you want to feel a certain way and you know that a substance makes you feel that way, that is psychological dependence. That is addiction. Okay. Please know I'm not preaching to you. I'm a normal person. I go out, I do things, but we need to be aware of all of these things. Okay. Have the information in your arsenal so that you can make the decision yourself and you don't have someone's big brother telling you what to do. Caffeine. So, thank you. Someone mentioned caffeine. Caffeine is actually one of the most addictive substances out there. Okay. Caffeine is something you can be addicted to. Obviously, it doesn't cause as an adverse effect as something like alcohol or whatever, but it's still something that we need to be aware of. Okay. Your body doesn't need caffeine to function. It might feel like that because it's physically and psychologically telling you that, but you don't actually need it. Try cut down a tiny bit and see. Is sugar addictive? Hell yes, that's actually the most addictive one. The second one is caffeine and then nicotine, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And just because your addiction is low on the list, it doesn't mean it's not addictive. Okay. It doesn't work like that. Can psychological dependence be applied to sexual addictions? Yes, there's been big chats in psychology at the moment about whether or not we can now classify sexual addiction as a type of addiction. And since it can cause you to crave the feeling that it produces, because sex produces dopamine, all of those things, I would argue, yes, maybe it could be classified as addictive. Okay. Does that not mean, you can get addicted to anything? Yes, we can get addicted to anything because neural pathways will kind of just be like, okay, cool. I like the way my brain feels when I do this or the way I feel on this. So I'm going to carry on doing that, or I'm going to keep asking for that. We can get addicted to anything. Okay. But obviously some addictions are better than others. Okay. You can have an exercise addiction. Obviously, if it gets too far and you're starting to, I don't know, not eat properly or exercise to the extent that you're getting sick, then it's going to be bad. But I would argue that exercise addiction is a pretty good addiction to have. Okay, so remember, addiction isn't always a bad thing. We're talking specifically in these lecture series about when it's a drug. Okay, I'll answer the one about tea. Salt. Salt is also to an extent because food can make us feel good. Remember, food like releases dopamine when we eat, when we do something that makes us happy. If food is that thing for you, releases dopamine. So in that way, salt could be addictive. But remember, just because something's addictive doesn't mean you have to avoid it. It's only when that addiction can lead to real serious physical and psychological and whatever problems, which is what we're talking about today. Can you develop a drug dependence to maybe nicotine from secondhand smoking? Yes, secondhand smoking is a very, very scary one because you can develop a drug dependence from it because it's entering your system. Okay. Actually, can you? I don't know. I just know that secondhand smoke is really, really bad for you because you can have the same effect as someone that is smoking it. So I think so. Can drugs affect hormones like progesterone? I'm sure some drugs can. I don't know them off the top of my head. For example, though, progesterone is something that some, what's it called? Birth control will affect. Like those things can be affected. I see we have a raised hand. Sorry, I just got through everything in there.
Yes, good evening. I just wanted to ask, how would you go about fixing or trying to treat an addiction that is being sensationalized by society through broadcast media? Because it's easier to address something that is really bad, such as maybe the excessive use of marijuana or the excessive use of cocaine, because people genuinely think it's bad, but something such as sugar, which is sensationalized on TV, which is in Coke, it's not easy to address because yes, you know it's bad, but at the same time, it seems like it's so cool to have because they use families as well in order to promote it. So how would you go about doing that, even though you know it has a bad effect on you? You don't feel like it's a bad thing because everyone drinks Coke, so let's all drink Coke.
Okay, thank you for that point. That's where things like public mental health and public health forums and campaigns and stuff come into play. It's something that Michelle Obama tried to do a lot when she was first lady. In her first term, she tried to have a lot more awareness campaigns for how children in America consume way too much salt and sugar and don't exercise enough. So those are kind of the ways that we can do it. There's also a lot more laws now about showing like drugs on TV and stuff like that, specifically smoking. That's the big one at the moment. Like they're trying to cut down on how much smoking is shown on TV. And to an extent, that's what the sugar tax in South Africa is trying to achieve. And if you like look around and stuff, Coke very much tries to like advertise, look, we've got 0 caffeine and 0 sugar options, even though you're still going to go buy the other one because you prefer the taste or whatever. But there are like some steps that have been taken to like try and affect that, but mostly just campaigning and awareness. Like that's the only way that we can actually get people to realize that like, hey, that's not something that we should be doing. Okay, I'm going to carry on now. Drug tolerance then. This is once your body tells you, hey, we don't have a problem. Things are good. Okay. So consuming increasing amounts of a drug to experience a desired effect. So tolerance is now your body's like, we don't have a problem. However, can we have some more? That's kind of what's happening. Okay. So it can happen metabolically or pharmacokinetically, where the repeated exposure of this drug accelerates the rate at which the drug is being decomposed. So now, because your drug is entering your system, your body's like, oh boy, this guy again. I love this dude. Then your liver is going to start decomposing it quicker because it wants you to get it in again. You know, it like wants the effect immediately, so the liver breaks it down quickly, and then immediately you want it again. So metabolically, your body can break it down quicker to make sure that it comes in quicker and has that effect quicker. And then pharmacodynamically, that's when repeated exposure leads to cellular adaptation. So since this substance is continuously coming into your body, eventually your body is going to be like, oh, no, this is fine. Like we know this guy by now. And obviously that's bad as well because your body is now tricking itself into thinking that this is a normal thing to have in your body. Okay, causes of substance use disorders. Okay, this is going to go quick, so don't worry about time. Okay, so the causes, we're going to look at the individual etiology of substance use disorders. So the individual causes of substance use disorders. So what causes substance use in a person? Okay, the two main bubbles are inherited vulnerability. So you got that vulnerability from someone else, or interpersonal factors. Now that you're interacting in the world, there are also some ways that you can become dependent on things. Okay. The risk factor approach, which is, it's something we use in psychology, specifically in like forensic work. So you look at all the risks and protective factors for something and like kind of weigh up, like, is it good or is it bad mostly? it's found when they were looking at adolescents, there are risk factors that we're going to talk about, these causes that can increase our vulnerability to substance use, but there are protective factors that can help decrease it. So even though like it's a big scary world out there and we can be vulnerable to substance use, protective factors can help us to not be as vulnerable to this kind of stuff. Okay, I kept this in here because I think it's something for us to remember. Like when things seem hopeless and you feel like, no, I'm never going to get out of this slump. I'm never going to, be able to not be dependent on this thing. There are like people and activities and steps that you can take to not be as susceptible or as vulnerable to a substance, and you can take control again. Okay. I've included risk and protective factors for drugs. Okay, so you can have a look at this. I will put the slides up today. And then risk and protective factors and how this will then play into vulnerability. Okay, biological factors. Biological is like, that is the biology. That is the person. We can't change the person. Research has shown there appears to be a significantly greater heritability for substance dependence than substance abuse, and substance abuse for non-problematic use. So if you have someone in your family with a substance dependence problem, someone that's related to you, so heritability, so a parent or grandparent or a relative who shares your blood, if they have a substance dependence problem, you have a good heritability for also developing that. If they have a substance abuse problem, there's a great heritability for that, but not as much for dependence. So I can't say, okay, your mom abuses something, so you're going to be dependent on it. Not as much, but it can obviously lead to, because we saw how easy it is to jump from each of those steps. And then the same thing for heritability of non-problematic use, but very, very little. Okay, so the main thing to take away from this is if there's someone in your family that is related to you by blood, that has a dependence problem or an abuse problem, there's a good chance that that you or someone else related to that person will also have a similar problem, because biologically, so genetically, they are predisposed to having an issue with this. There are neurological processes that can contribute to substance dependence. Okay, so these are neurological things that happen in our brain that can make us susceptible. Firstly, reinforcement. So we get rewarding stimuli relief from an unpleasant sensation, which is positive reinforcement. So if a drug makes us feel better about something, our body is going to go, okay, well, we need to do that again because that really helped. And that's how reinforcement can then be a biological factor. Okay, then neuroadaptation is a compensatory adjustment of the brain. So the brain literally goes, okay, cool. This is my life now. There's a lot of drugs floating around. This is my new normal. I'm going to adapt from here. Psychological factors. So there are personality traits that have been identified as risk factors for substance use disorder. So if you have a certain personality traits, there's a chance that you could develop a substance use disorder. High levels of novelty seeking and sensation seeking, and high levels of disinhibition, which is low behavioral control and high impulsivity, those could all lead to substance use disorder problems because it makes you more likely to. It doesn't mean that, let's say you have ADHD and you now have impulsivity issues, behavioral control issues, you like sensation seeking, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't mean that you are likely to then, or that you are suddenly going to become a drug addict. However, if you go look in the DSM or you go and look into research about ADHD, they have found that there is a link between them because of exactly that. Okay. Also, if that's just your personality, you just are a novelty seeking or sensation seeking person, or you are just someone who is quite impulsive, same thing. Okay. Also on the other end, so not related to personality traits, if there are deficits in psychosocial skills or depression or anxiety disorders, this can also make you more susceptible, obviously. Okay. Just because you might, be, if you're depressed, maybe you're like less, I don't know, you don't care about things as much. So you might not really care that you're doing something that's harmful to your body. Anxiety disorders, you might want to treat that, and then, you know, it becomes an issue. Psychosocial skills, if you struggle in social situations, maybe you have a drink, and now every time you're in a social situation, you feel like you need to drink because you struggle in that situation. Same thing. Or if you're experiencing psychological distress, you might want to, you know, self-medicate with a substance. I put a video on Are You Connected under the Lecture 10 heading of the 5-factor personality model. You'll learn more about it in Personality Psych, so I don't want to go into too much depth, but you can go and look at that model and kind of figure out where you would stand on each of the scales. And yeah, it's quite interesting. And you can maybe see, oh, I can see how that trait might be linked to substance use. Can therapy help people with these traits to control these behaviors associated with their personality? Most certainly. Therapy can help us control impulsivity, or like, I don't know, not feeling like you don't care about the world or anything like that that could make you susceptible. Therapy very much helps with that. Okay, it might calm your anxiety a little bit to talk about things, and then you no longer need to take medication or self-medicate for something that could lead to abuse. Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy is something that is used often in just like, you know, mild cases. Obviously, we spoke about the higher intervention levels need to be used when it's more severe, but cognitive behavioral therapy basically teaches you to rewire the way you think about yourself. I found for me that CBT really helped me to become a more confident and like self-assured person. Even though I am a chronically shy person, actually, it helped me to kind of get over that and be like, okay, cool, you can be shy and introverted and in your own little bubble, but you can also, you are capable and ready and happy to do that. Why is it found that it is so hard to cope in rehab? Rehab is very, very rigorous. Remember, you're going through withdrawal symptoms as well as going through psychological distress because you're away from your family, you're away from your routine, you're away from the substances that help you function. So rehab is very, very, very difficult, and relapse is possible if you then exit out of rehab and don't take any steps to get rid of these factors. Okay, these factors are most likely going to cause those relapses and stuff like that after rehab. So interpersonal, so family risk factors. If there's family dysfunction, then that could lead you to try and pursue other stuff and, you know, feel better about something because you're in a stressful situation. If you have inadequate and inconsistent family management practices, so people aren't there enough to support you or look after you or monitor you, or offer guidance, that could also be something. If there's normalization of substance abuse in your family, like it's just a no big deal kind of thing, that could also normalize the use of substances and then you want to use it. And then peer risk factors, if you have peers that are using drugs and if there's then peer pressure. Someone's asked, besides from rehab and therapy, what other methods can one use to stop drug addiction? This was on that previous slide, and there might be some answers for you in the videos. I think we might talk about it more tomorrow. Okay. Last one, environmental. So this is like in your environment around you, so in the world around you. So if you drop out of school, if you have low levels of educational achievement, you might be very demotivated and you might want to just, you know, escape from the world, all of that stuff. You also might have not reached an education level enough where you might have realized or learned about the fact that drugs have adverse effects, okay? Also, you know, obviously dropping out of school, low levels of education, poverty, all of those things, crime rates, they're also interlinked and stuff like that. That can also lead to more exposure of drugs, okay? Which leads into the next one, exposure to substance use or abuse. So the degree of acceptance or approval in a community, for example, in low-income communities or high crime communities, drug use just might be a very normal everyday thing. It's not cool, but it is. Example from the material girl world would be wine moms and people that go off to Stellenbosch and post about wine tasting every weekend and Rhodes University, students drinking all the time and that just being part of student culture. Since it's accepted and approved of to give into those behaviors, this is going to be something that could lead you to then taking it too far and it becoming use and abuse. That's why I said a lot of people don't realize that they actually are dependent on a substance or they are abusing a substance because it is so normal for them. Okay. Also, there'll be different levels of availability of drugs in a community. Okay. Then finally, occupational factors. Okay. Didn't know about this, but there's something called the DOP system in farming in South Africa. It used to be a huge thing back in the 1800s and stuff like that, but it's something that still sneaks in now. And in viticulture, which is wine and stuff, often to like just kind of keep everyone going and stuff like that, workers and their employers will give the workers wine or whatever to just, you know, keep them going. And then to them, that's just a normal part of their everyday life, part of their working environment, but that's actually not normal. It's very, very odd. I was working as a teacher up until recently. I think it would be very, very strange if my boss came up to me and said, okay, good job on explaining osmosis. He has a shot of tequila. You know, it doesn't make sense. And it never should make sense to go to an environment and drink. Okay, same thing with bartenders. Like just because you're working in a bar and around alcohol doesn't mean that you should be getting sloshed all the time. Okay, that is the end of our lectures, lecture for today. If anyone has any questions, you can ask in the chat or stay on. Otherwise, you're welcome to leave. I know we went on a little bit longer. I'm sorry about that, but I think those discussions that we had were quite useful. Please feel free to chat and everything. Yeah, I'm here. Tabisa, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, I wanted to ask, how exactly would we go about trying to solve the problem of, it's not necessarily a substance, but augmented reality is also a very dangerous factor because it does change your psychological processing. And I actually have a friend who's addicted to augmented reality, and thus his personality is like his personality, he has like deficiencies that are a result of him being like using augmented reality excessively, as in he doesn't even sleep, stays on it all day, all night. And how do you go about solving that, especially in this era that we're in where the metaverse is so promoted and these new technologies are coming out and it's basically like a norm or a must that you must partake in all these things? Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you're dealing with this, because I think a lot of people forget that it's not only the person going through an addiction that is affected, it's the people around them too. So my best advice to you would just be there for your friend. You know, be very forthright about how it's affecting you and how it's affecting people around them. Don't always make it about them and like how they are effing up and stuff like that. They talk about like in conflict resolution and conflict management, are statements in like I feel statements instead of you are statements. So instead of saying you are ruining your social life and everything, you can say, I feel like I never get to see you anymore as my friend. I feel concerned about the amount of time. You know, you kind of just bring it back on yourself and show them how you are being affected. Because I've found that when I have been in a bad spot, the thing that always pulls me out of it is a friend reminding me like, hey, I'm so worried about you. I hope you're okay. I'm stressed out. Like I miss my friend or whatever. That normally would pull me out of my slump better than someone just yelling at me. Okay, and I'd also recommend that you go look up gaming disorder. It is an actual thing that people are looking into. I think it was part of one of the honors courses in 2020. I don't know if it still is, but that's when I was doing honors. And gaming disorder and internet addiction are actual defined concepts. So look into that, and there'll be support systems and information about that too. Okay, someone asked me to just briefly explain misuse, abuse, dependence. So misuse, There's some consequences that happen from misuse that are not good, like not ideal. And it doesn't happen often enough that it's like recurrent. So recurrent means like it's happening at a semi-regular rate. Okay, abuse then is when you're using it so much that it's quite more often and the consequences are a little bit more serious now. Okay, it's starting to affect stuff around them. And then dependence is once that abuse has reached a point where we can observe cognitive, behavioral, or physiological symptoms that the substance is being used a lot, then it is going to be dependence. Okay, I have another question. I hope that answers your question. Someone asked in the chat to clarify that. In respect of substance dependence, I was taking an antidepressant and it felt like they made everything worse and I stopped taking them. I became much better, but not completely. Okay, not all drugs agree with us, okay? By drugs, I mean like antidepressants or whatever. I know personally for me, I've been on antidepressants and things before that have not agreed with me. And I've had to then go on other ones. It's something that you have to shop around with because we all have different metabolisms and different ways that our bodies process drugs and stuff. And sometimes we just don't have a good match. Like it's literally as simple as like your body just being like, I don't really like that one. Like, don't really know what to do with it. So staying in touch with your medical provider, and if you do find that you're having really adverse effects on something, communicating that with them so that they can help you wean off it. Because remember, stopping something can also make you feel really, really, really bad and sick. Okay. Yeah, so just keep exploring, keep shopping around. This was a direct message, so you guys can't see it in the chat. But yeah, if you are taking something that you know you need or that you have been prescribed, but it's making you feel worse, go back to that same doctor and chat to them about it, and they will put you on something else. Okay, and they'll keep chopping and changing doses or types or whatever until they find the thing that works for you. Okay, and maybe it means you need therapy as well. Like therapy and medication in conjunction are what they work wonders. So yeah, don't be closed off to things. Try everything out and see what works for you. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, you can ask me. All right, I'm going to end the Zoom meeting there. Remember, my inbox is always open, always happy to help out.